radio enthusiasts. Welcome to another video about early radio from the Roaring Twenties Antique Radio Museum. If you're enjoying the videos, please take a second and hit the subscribe button. You'll be alerted to new videos as soon as they're posted. The focus of this video will be on one of the most important pioneers of early radio, Edwin H Armstrong. On December 18, 1890, New York natives John and Emily Armstrong would have their first child, Edwin. It wasn't long before Edwin would have a sister named Edith, who the family would call Cricket. This photo is from 1896, when Edwin was about 6 years old. When Edwin Armstrong was 8 years old, he became seriously ill with rheumatic fever, an often fatal disease. Somehow Armstrong survived the illness, but ended up with a serious lingering side effect, Sydenham's chorea, a serious neurological disorder. For the rest of his life, Armstrong would have a serious tic, made worse by stress or excitement. After recovering from his illness, Armstrong became very interested in radios and antennas. He built his own radio station and a 100-foot tall antenna at his home. In 1909, Armstrong would attend Columbia University to study electrical engineering. After graduating, he would become an assistant professor and later a full professor at Columbia. While a student there, Armstrong worked with noted Professor John Harold Moorcraft to try to find a way to amplify radio signals. At the end of the summer vacation in 1912, Armstrong was working in his attic when he finally made the breakthrough he was looking for, the amplification of radio signals by regeneration. By 1913, Armstrong was ready to demonstrate his new invention, the regenerative circuit. During the time Armstrong was working on his regeneration circuit, Lee DeForest was also attempting to amplify radio signals without much success. Armstrong made several public demonstrations of his new invention. One of the demonstrations took place at Columbia in front of some engineers from American Marconi. One of the engineers was David Sarnoff. Armstrong and Sarnoff would begin a long friendship at that event, and unfortunately, one that would end badly. Another of Armstrong's demonstrations was at Columbia University, where a conference of the Institute of Radio Engineers, or IRE, was being held. Lee DeForest was in the audience that day. DeForest was upset that someone else had discovered a way to use his invention, the Audion tube, to amplify radio signals. Shortly after that demonstration, DeForest began telling anyone who would listen that he invented the regenerative circuit. DeForest had a huge ego and was not the most savory of characters. After several successful demonstrations, Armstrong applied for a patent, and on October 6, 1914, the United States Patent Office issued the patent to Armstrong. Lee DeForest challenged Armstrong in court, claiming that he had invented regeneration. After over a decade of legal wrangling and several court rulings, mostly in Armstrong's favor, the Supreme Court ruled in DeForest's favor. The court did not understand what they were ruling on and made a lame excuse about some detail in the language. The major electrical engineering groups of the day saw the farcical decision for what it was. The IRE, the Franklin Institute, and the American Institute of Electrical Engineers all rejected the Supreme Court decision and declared that Edwin H Armstrong had invented the regenerative circuit. While the 10-year patent war was going on, the United States entered World War I, declaring war on April 6, 1917. Edwin Armstrong would join the Army Signal Corps soon after. He was stationed in France and rose to the rank of major. While stationed there, he invented the superheterodyne circuit. The superheterodyne circuit was a huge improvement in radio selectivity and reception. Armstrong applied for a patent in 1918, and the patent was issued in 1920. By 1923, Armstrong had sold his patent and became a millionaire at the age of 33. Around this time, Armstrong also had another big event in his life, his marriage to Marion McInnes, David Sarnoff's secretary. Edwin Armstrong was always thinking of ways to improve radio. One of the issues with radio that bothered him the most was static. In the early 1920s, Armstrong would begin his research into eliminating radio static on the broadcast band. Over time, he became very frustrated trying to solve early radio's biggest problem. He once wrote, "This is a terrific problem. It is the only one I have ever encountered that, approached from any direction, always seems to be a stone wall." His research finally led him to try transmitting on a much broader bandwidth, 200 kilohertz. which is roughly 10 times the bandwidth used on the regular broadcast band. Not only did this change eliminate almost all static, the sound was much better than anything he had heard before. Edwin Armstrong had invented FM radio. Using frequency modulation instead of amplitude modulation was a solution he spent a decade looking for. In 1933, Armstrong was granted 4 patents for FM radio. During an IRE conference in 1935, Armstrong would demonstrate his latest invention. Conference attendees were expecting another improvement in broadcast radio. What they heard was shocking. With a friend transmitting an FM signal from his home in Yonkers, New York, the electrical engineers who gathered for the demonstration heard the clearest sound ever heard over a radio receiver. Music was played and different sounds were transmitted by Armstrong's friend, and the total lack of static, the clarity, and the richness of sound stunned everyone in the audience. Edwin H Armstrong hadn't demonstrated an improvement in radio broadcasting, he had started a revolution. David Sarnoff soon realized that Armstrong's invention was a threat to RCA's AM-based broadcasting empire and the RCA rollout of their upcoming new way of reaching the public, television. Sarnoff used every dirty trick he could think of to stop his former friend from starting a broadcast network using FM radio. He used his influence to lobby the Federal Communications Commission and persuaded them to turn down Armstrong's application for a broadcasting license. The FCC backed down and issued Armstrong a license when Armstrong threatened to take his new technology to another country. Armstrong built a radio station with a huge 425-foot tall antenna in Alpine, New Jersey. The first FM broadcast to the general public was in 1939. Soon after, Armstrong would begin adding stations to his Yankee network. By the end of that year, 20 experimental radio stations were broadcasting in FM. In 1940, the FCC authorized commercial FM broadcasting. They set the new FM band at 42 to 50 megahertz, allowing for up to 40 radio stations. By October, the FCC had granted licenses to 15 FM stations. Zenith and other radio manufacturers began building FM receivers, and by the end of 1941, 400,000 FM receivers were sold. 1941 arrived, and along with it came World War II. Edwin Armstrong would be stationed at Camp Evans in New Jersey. During that time, Armstrong would work on applying his new FM technology to radar. He abandoned the work to continue his battle for FM radio. A research project run by the military would use a modified version of Armstrong's FM to attempt to bounce a radar signal off the moon, which was accomplished in 1946. RCA offered to buy an FM license from Armstrong, but Armstrong wanted RCA to pay royalties for the use of his new broadcasting system. The parties could not come to terms. RCA started selling radios with an FM band without an Armstrong license. Sarnoff used RCA's influence with Congress to have them change the frequencies of the FM band to 88 to 108 megahertz and reduce the power limits FM stations could broadcast at. That rendered all FM transmitters and receivers obsolete. Armstrong went to Congress with some friendly senators and started legal action against both NBC and RCA for patent infringement. The lawsuit dragged on, and it was several years before Armstrong would testify in court. The legal ordeal would take a toll on Armstrong's health and his marriage while also draining his bank accounts. He was broke, depressed, and had lost all hope. On Thanksgiving Eve in 1953, Armstrong had a fight with his wife, Marion. That night she left him to stay with relatives. On January 31, 1954, Edwin H. Armstrong would write a note of apology to his wife, put on his hat and coat, and jump out of a 10th floor window to his death. At the time of his death, Armstrong had 21 lawsuits pending. His wife Marion continued the battle that Armstrong didn't have the strength to finish. The mid-1960s brought an end to all legal action, with Marion winning 2 lawsuits and settling all the rest. Edwin H. Armstrong contributed more to the advancement of radio than most others in radio history. Even today, his superheterodyne principle is still used in many communications applications, such as cell phones. Though he never received the recognition and fame in the eyes of the public that others had received, his peers in the fields of electrical engineering and broadcasting were well aware of his accomplishments. In 1917, Armstrong won the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering Medal of Honor. During World War I, the French government awarded Armstrong the Medal of a Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur for his contributions to wartime wireless communications. In 1940, he won the Holly Medal. In 1942, he won the IEEE Edison Medal. And in 1951, he won the Washington Award. In 1981, Armstrong was posthumously inducted in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. He was also recognized for his achievements by the United States Postal Service, issuing a stamp in his honor in 1983. In the year 2000, he was inducted in the Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame. Edwin H Armstrong led a troubled life, betrayed by others and often a victim of his own stubbornness. Though he never received the public recognition he had earned, his work led to a kind of respect and admiration that does not fade with time. It's a type of fame that endures to this day and will continue to endure well into the future. That's it for this video. There will be more to come as we continue to investigate the early history of the world's first mass medium, radio. Thanks for watching.